Good evening, everyone. So, tonight is our second Monday of the month, and as usual, we have our English meetings. Today, Hendrik was scheduled to come, but he had a problem at work, so I'm going to replace him in tonight's talk. But before going to that part of the meeting, we usually start our meetings with a prayer. And right after the prayer, we have tonight we're going to have Juliana coming to read a brief message from the book Our Daily Bread, and then talk a little bit about the message. And right after that, we have the main talk of the night, which is usually about the gospel according to Spiritism, and we are following every item on that book as organized by Allan Kardec. And then after the talks, we're gonna have the passes session or the passes therapy, and we have our final announcements, then the final prayer, then we're gonna head back home. So as I started saying, let's start doing our initial prayer so that we can be even more focused and more connected to the good spirits, to those who organize everything and prepare this place for us to be here so that we can receive the blessings even deeper by opening our minds and our hearts to the teachings we're gonna hear tonight. So we would like to thank Jesus for once again giving us the opportunity of being here tonight, gathering with some friends, discarnated or incarnated, and that we all can perceive and open ourselves up to your blessings, dear friend, and may these blessings touch us deeply and help us understand that your message of love, of faith, of courage is the message of the good news that shows us that we are more than this body that we have right now, that we are spirits that live forever. And so, with this prayer, with your love and the love of God, we would like to ask your permission for us to start our meeting tonight. So be it. So as I mentioned before, let's invite Juliana to read the message from the book Our Daily Bread, and she will tell us what is the title, and she'll explain it to us.
Good evening. Tonight's talk is Ceasar and Us from Our Daily Bread. Chapter 102. And Jesus answered them, saying, Then give to Caesar what is Caesar, and to God what is to God. Mark chapter 12, verse 17. All over the world, according to their own merits, people will always encounter the figure of Caesar, symbolized by the secular government. Evil individuals will obviously produce evil politicians. Idle and indifferent collectively will face disorganized administrations. In any case, Caesar's influence will surround the individual and demand the fulfillment of material obligations. It's imperative to give him what is his. The student of the gospel should not invoke religious principle or individual idealism to shun these obligations. If there are errors in the law, let us remember that the extent of our individual debts to the divine providence, and let us cooperate with the human governing body by offering our good will and our participation in its duties. Aware that our disinterest or rebelliousness will not resolve its problem. It is preferable for disciplines to sacrifice themselves and suffer rather than lag behind regarding the respectable laws that temporarily govern them on the physical plane, whether throughout disobedience towards the established principle or throughout the excessive enthusiasm that attempts them to advance too rapidly for their time. Are there incurious decrees? Try to remember if you have been cooperating with those who govern your material landscape. Live in harmony with your superiors, and do not forget that the best position is that of balance. If you intend to live correctly, do not give Caesar the vinegar of your sour criticism. Assist him with your efficient work in a healthy desire to do right, convinced that he and we are the children of the same God. This reading is very interesting because no matter when Emmanuel has given us these messages, is always relevant to the time that we're living. Especially this reading, he's really comparing the, give what is to Caesar, and what to God, what is to God. What he's saying that, we can take a look at the times that we're living today, and we see so many strange, debate in the secular government about questions of, people pushing idealism that are not necessarily what we want for the future, but that's pushing this question about who you want to be in the future, who you want to be as individuals. And what Emmanuel's here is saying is, we don't want basically to say that God's or the divine law is one. He's saying that, see, there is a time, since we're living in a world that is governed by secular government and by the laws of men, then we should follow those laws and follow the divine laws as well. But the reason why we want to follow the law of men and secular government, no matter if it's the government that we live every day, or is if the laws that you have or rules that you have in your home or in your neighborhood or your job, we want to make sure that if we follow and try our best to live in harmony, then we can live and gather and have a great experience with one another. So, and he not only say this in, if there's something and errors in the law, then we should work together to fix them, but not necessarily say fight or be rebellious against these laws or these rules, because necessarily that doesn't give us any return or any positivity. So, if there's any errors, let's try to move and evolve that we can be better. But if there's but always giving our best and respecting these rules to our best abilities until we evolve to a point that now we can have something better. And a lot in the end of the reading, what he really says is not necessarily talking about this Caesar, but he's talking about, and it's very relatable in our day-to-day, especially in our work. He's saying, try to remember if you have been cooperating with those who govern your material landscape, whether that could be your government or that could be your job. Try to do your best in every day. Try to give your best at your work, because even though somebody is not going to, might not like what you do or might not like the way you do it, but if you give it your best, then that's gonna maintain the harmony that we want in our everyday lives. It's going to give us that return of living a better life, communicating with one another, and understanding that we do have these differences, but we also can live with each other, even though we have different mindsets, different opinions, whether it's with this political landscape that we live in now, especially more now than ever, but also just in a day-to-day, we can get this message and apply it, not necessarily on a macro level, but also in a very microscopic, and to try to analyze our day-to-day. So basically what he's saying is, we follow the rules of God and the rules that Jesus have come every day to teach us to be better individuals in our day-to-day. but also not forgetting that, we do live in this world that we're here to learn from one another, but we set rules from each other, and maybe and as a way to organize how we live. So I hope that makes sense, but that is basically what I've gotten back about this reading. So it was really interesting because it felt very relevant to the current times. So now, thank you for your time. So now I'm going to pass it over to Mackenzie.
Yeah, Juliana, this message is, I guess you went, at least as far as I can understand, you went straight to the point, and Caesar representing us in terms of government, and the us there representing each one of us, is like Jesus's message, and like you said, is so for today. I think was said like 2,000 years ago, but it is so much for today. And of course, tonight we're talking in English and speaking in English. And you mentioned about the problems with the government, but of course, being Brazilian, we are in the same kind of landscape, and not only in Brazil. If you go and pay attention to other governments around the world, we are all having the same kind of deep division on what is really important, what is not, what is our state. And like you said, what do we need to do? I mean, do our best, the best that we can wherever we are, be it in the micro level or in the macro level, in the microscopic level. Yeah, this message it is really relevant. So it's just as a reminder. I mean, I'm going to talk about something a little bit different tonight than this, but I wanted to reinforce what you said just by reminding everyone about the message itself, which is chapter 102 on the Our Daily Bread, Caesar and Us. So if we want to read it again, get the book and read the message is online. Just type the title and the title of the book. You'll be able to read it. Don't need to even buy the book, but go and read it, because it is a very, very powerful message. I forgot the book. Juliana, can you grab me the book there, please? Or Juliana, I wanted to show the book here. I have the electronic version, so thank you. So tonight, as I said in the beginning, we are going to continue studying the Gospel according to Spiritism. This is one of the translations. This was done by the International Spiritist Council, and is published by the Edicei, which are the editors of the International Spiritist Council, and it's a very, very nice translation. But of course, there are a few other translations which don't really make a big difference. And since it was translated from not from a weird language, it's translated from French. When you're translating from Hebrew, from ancient Greek, then right, you're translating from regular day-to-day language. I mean, it's a little bit easier. Of course, it has its difficulties as well, but there's no major problems with these translations. I wanted to bring the book because sometimes we don't see the book. And right now we are going through chapter 5, which is entitled "Blessed are the Afflicted," and we've been saying this in the past few weeks or few months, I should say, that this is the longer chapter, the longest chapter in the Gospel according to Spiritism, which is very sane. Because of course the Gospel according to Spiritism is supposed to bring us hope and a better outlook for our lives. And by noticing, maybe Kardec noticed that, I guess so, that we all suffer. We are all afflicted, sometimes physically, sometimes mentally, sometimes psychologically, sometimes all of them together, and much more. So I guess that when he was putting this together, he starts this section of the book with this chapter here, Blessed are the afflicted, which is a calling to all of us to really go deep inside of ourselves and think about the message that is being given to us by Jesus and by the good spirits in this case here, so that we can reflect about why we suffer, what are the causes of suffering, what do we do when we suffer, how do we take the message to relief, to give us some relief, because just we tend to say that the only Benjamin Franklin has this very interesting sentence where he says that there are only two certainties in life: death and taxes. Right? You're gonna pay tax and you're gonna die. Those are the only two certainties in life. I should add, not wanting to be better, bigger than Benjamin Franklin, but I don't know anyone who has not suffered. So maybe there are people who don't think, or who think that they were never happy, they never had a happy day in their lives. So but I wouldn't say that a kid had never had a suffering, at least one. So we will suffer. We will fall. We will scratch our knees. We will fall. We will, our parents will die, or our friends will die, or something. I'll lose something, and we will all suffer. Of course, some types of suffering go deeper than others, but it's kind of hard to compare sufferings, right? Oh, you lost your parent, I lost mine. It is different. Depends on how we even if we lose our mother and our father, without having also, and again, I apologize if this might sound a little bit, I don't know, presumptuous, but some people will suffer more because they lost their father than they lost their mother. It's a different type of suffering. I mean, you're gonna feel the loss of that person, but maybe you were more attached to your mother or to your father or to your son, and then the sufferings are different. And if even if within ourselves, when we have similar kinds of suffering, they feel differently, can you imagine how it feels to a different person? How different it is for another person. So it is kind of hard sometimes, and it's something that we maybe should learn more how to do. It's not to compare sufferings. It's just to acknowledge that the other person is suffering, and not to try to minimize the pain or maximize the pain, and just try to be as empathic as we can, as compassionate as we can, just to embrace. And if we tend to if we understand this, and if we tend to be more empathic towards the other, then we have to understand our own pain as well, and be empathic to our own pain. Understand that the pain will come, that the afflictions will come, that the evil, whatever we want to call it, evil, will come, will arrive in our lives. However, what do we do with that? How do we deal with it? What do I, as another English saying, right? If life throws you lemons, what do you do with your lemons, right? You just squeeze them and make them a lemonade, right? If life is throwing you rocks, start to build your own castle, or start to build your own house. So these are all sayings that we've been listening throughout our entire life. I mean, if something happens, we need to understand that it happens. It's not for me. It's not because of me only. It's because it really happens. And if you notice, I have not even started. I didn't even start to talk about the gospel itself. I mean, I'm just saying things that it's more or less a common knowledge of, independent where the culture we live in. It's something that we all can understand, that we can all relate to because we are all human beings, independently of where we are. If I'm blue blood, like the son of a prince, the son of a king, or if I was born in the deepest and poorest area of a country, of a town, I'm gonna suffer the same way as he's gonna suffer. I mean, if I am walking by and there's a nail on the ground and I step on the nail, it doesn't matter if I am blue blood or if I'm not a blue blood. It doesn't matter if I'm rich or if I'm poor. If my mother dies, it doesn't matter if I'm rich or if I'm poor. If I'm from Mars or if I'm from it, or if it's my neighbor, it doesn't matter. It really hits us differently, but it always hits us. So Kardec, of course, knowing that and having lived a long life up to that moment already, with all the experience that he had, of course, he realized that there would need to be a chapter about that, because Jesus talked about that naturally. But more than that, he realized maybe that there would need to be more things to be said about it, because we experience it in this world with much more constance than we would like to. But if that being true, he would need to address these specific situations so that we have more time to reflect and more time to realize, how do we cope with the situation? How do we act when something happens to me? What is that I need to do? And that's one thing that I'd like to make another parenthesis here. I was saying before that we should not minimize the pain or the suffering of another person, that we should understand the pain. Try to empathize, not to make it bigger or smaller. Try to understand it. Naturally, it is easy in some cases, it is hard in other cases. We just need to embrace that pain compassionately and say, here I am, and see what needed is just to listen, just to hear, or if some words are welcome there. If not, say nothing, just be there. So this empathizing is really, really important. But there's one thing, and there's one thing that goes together with that empathizing, which is when we are reading a chapter of any book, but specifically of a book like the Gospel According to Spiritism. I'm going to talk here because I have that urge myself sometimes, and I have to think about it before doing so, is that when I'm reading a book like this, we tend to think about other people. We tend to think about that person that suffered. We tend to think about that person that lost whatever, a house, a job, lost a parent, lost a friend, lost a loved one, lost whatever it is, and then it's suffering, or just had a big fight over something, and then there was a split in the decision of the house that you live, or of your family, or whatever problem we are facing. And then we are reading these things here. And of course, when it talks about, and Hendrik was here and talked about it, I was here before and talked about it, there are causes for these afflictions that are related to this life. There are causes of these afflictions, or some of these, that are related to another life, to a previous life that we have. And we tend to see these things, and when we see the pain in another person, we tend to try to realize, why is that person suffering? And we tend to grab that idea and try and judge the other person. Oh, what did she do, or did he do in another life? What did he do when he was young? What did she do when she was young? Oh, she must have been like a slave owner in the previous life. He must have been like a slave, the owner of a house, and then he mistreated all the employees of the house. ourselves. And we tend to start to think about these things about the other people. However, what we really need to understand, and that's been our problem, not after we became spiritists. That has been our problem the moment we started to read any kind of text in the world. The moment we started to learn the lessons from Jesus or from whatever religion, it is very common for us to take the message, to try to understand it, and apply to the others. And apply to my neighbor, apply to my wife, to my husband, to my son, to my daughter, even to my dog. But there's one thing in our houses that we tend not to apply these teachings. One thing, I'm not talking about a person, talking about one thing. It's the mirror. We never apply these, we almost never, it is very hard for us to apply the teachings of these books, and specifically about the gospel according to Spiritism, to the mirror. Because it is hard to look inside our own eyes and really ask ourselves, why am I suffering? And that's what Kardec is trying to talk to us here. And at this, the message for tonight is not from Kardec. It was a message that was written in, get the year here, was written in Paris in 1863, and was written by Saint Augustine, which is one of the fathers of the Catholic Church, or as some people prefer to say, let me get the, oh, it's before this. What is this? Am I on? Yeah, I'm all confused here. I'm seeing number 20, right? The item 20 here. And then I'm looking for item 20, and it's another message. But actually, item 20 is the next message. I'm just at the wrong page. So it's Saint Augustine in Paris, 1863. He wrote this message, and Kardec transcribed it, of course, through a medium. And then he writes this message, which is entitled "Evil and Its Remedy." So, what is the medicine for evil? What is the medicine for bad things that happen to our lives? That's the name of the message, and that's what Saint Augustine will talk to us about. And he, of course, will not go straight to the point. He will prepare us for what he wants to say, but he is very hard on us. I mean, he really asks questions that need answers, not from him. He gives us questions, or he asks us questions that we need to be sincere to understand. If what we are looking for in a religion, in a philosophy, is lie, then I guess we are at the wrong place. So when we read a message like this, which is message 19 of chapter 5 of the Gospel according to Spiritism, we have to this is one of the first things that we have to have in our minds is, am I going to be sincere to myself? Because the parenthesis that I mentioned before, the message is not for the others. The message is for me. So am I going to be sincere or not? That's basic. I have to go into a book like this, or into a talk like we're having now, is how sincere I am with myself when I'm reading a message like this. So he asks, and there's not the first question he asks is not a big problem, but he asks, and the way it's written here, it looks like this was a bigger or a longer message, or maybe there was a question and then he answered the question, and the question was kind of lost, but it is interesting nonetheless. He says, is the earth, or is your earth, is our planet then a place of joy, a paradise, or a delight of delights? Is this place that we are living, is this earth a place of pure joy and only party and only delights? And I mean, we don't need to be that truthful to ourselves, but if we open up our eyes, of course, we will see that it is not. Well, that's how he starts the message. He starts by asking this question. And when I read this this question, and I read it again a few times to get used to it, it is an eye-opener for us. So that's how he starts. He starts by saying, instead of giving us the answer, he asks the question for us to already start thinking about it and saying, okay, this place that we are living has a lot of problems. It's not a place of pure joy, of pure happiness, of pure delights. No, it is not. So if the place, if the planet, if is not a place of pure delights, a paradise, he even uses the word, the paradise of delights, he doesn't ask that, but now I'm asking, why am I complaining that I'm suffering? Why am I complaining that I'm suffering? Right? It is as if, and maybe we should ask this question to ourselves, it looks like sometimes when we ask this, why am I suffering? It is as if I don't want to suffer and I want my neighbor to suffer. Because, okay, why am I suffering? Right? Why is not that person that killed the other person is not suffering? Why isn't the other one doing? I am the best person ever, so why am I suffering? So, he calls Jesus here in the beginning, he calls the prophet, but he also refers to the Old Testament when the prophets in the old book saying that there would be people who were born here, who lived here, would suffer, and he says they were there would be weeping, crying, right, and crying of despair, and gnashing of teeth, as if everything hurts, and then I have to, hold my teeth together and tighten up so that I can, not feel that much of a pain when I'm whipped. And didn't you hear that? If you're reading this book, and if you're a Jew or a Christian or a Spiritist, or haven't you ever noticed that we live in a place that they're suffering? That's basically his question. So why are you complaining? And then he starts right off the bat. He says, you should, and I'm going to stop and go back a little. We mentioned, maybe, I don't know how many months ago, that Kardec organizes this book, has a sequence. It has a logical sequence, and that's why we are going step by step. We're not jumping around. We're going item by item. The chapter right before this, which was a few months ago, talks about reincarnation. And a few months ago, after chapter 4, we already talked about on chapter 5 about, and we mentioned that tonight, about our suffering coming from early this life, maybe when I was younger, or if it's not, the causes of our sufferings cannot be found here in this life, it might be coming from a previous life. So we have to have this in mind when St. Augustine asks some questions here. We have to understand that the mindset here is there is more to this life, to our life, than this incarnation that we are in. There must be something. So the question that he asks right after, or something that he says right after these first questions, is he says, and I'm going to read because it is very interesting the way he says, you, talking to us, so I have to read this to me. I'm not reading it to you, I'm reading it to me. You who have gone to live there. So he's assuming that we all know that we have come here to live here. That like we chose to come. That we had a previous life. So you who have gone to live there must expect burning tears and bitter suffering. You need to expect that because you already know that this is not a world of paradise, of delights, and a place of pure joy. Period. And making this connection with what Juliana was saying here, once we understand this, we have to learn to live with it, doing the best we can to make it better. To change, but not to change the law of God, but to change the way we interact with the law of God. How to make it work for me and for everybody that's around. And not to try to create a second law and think that this will change it. Oh no, this is my law. I don't want to gravity to work anymore. So I'm just gonna ignore gravity. Yeah, gravity will not ignore you. So that's the whole point. So it doesn't make any sense. When we mention something like that, we laugh, but that's sometimes that's what we think we are doing with God's law. We are ignoring it as if ignoring it will make it not happen. You know, when we have a kid, they're very young, and then they want to disappear from our lives. What do? They cover their eyes, and then we are gone, right? Of course we are not gone. We are right there. But it is more or less what we are doing. We are closing our eyes, imagining that this God's law just disappear. And of course it doesn't disappear. It's still there acting. So we need to grow up, using the metaphor of the baby. We need to grow up. We need to understand that it's not covering our eyes that will make the problem disappear. We have to work it out. We have to try to work it out. So, but he goes on, and then he says, he's going to talk about a little bit about Jesus, calling him the Master. And he says, he asks questions again. We all talk about Jesus. I'm going to try to translate what he asks. We all talk about Jesus, and we think that Jesus is great, and then think that Jesus is perfect, which he is. And then we find him to be that person that will help us, that will create miracles, that will, right, do stuff for us. And we acknowledge that. We acknowledge that. But the question he asks here is, okay, if, and he's talking about Jesus, sometimes we tend to think that Jesus did this or did that. And sometimes we say, oh, God did this and God did that. So we mix Jesus and God sometimes. But he asks, okay, so if God, or if Jesus, if you prefer, if God does this, all this perfect thing, he creates and he cures me, and you believe in him when he does that, right? Why don't you believe him when you're suffering? And then you blame him for, if you think he is great when he's doing good things, why don't you think that he is great even when you're suffering? What changed? What is different? So think about these questions as questions that are deep philosophical questions. These are questions that they are not simple to answer. We have to really think about them and say, he has a point. Because if we consider God to be perfect, and I am suffering, I cannot blame God for that. I have to think about it because, okay, oh, my God is a God of miracles, and then I'm suffering. So I have actually two choices if I really believe that God is perfect. I'm going to blame somebody else for what I'm doing because I cannot blame God. So, or I can blame myself. Who is easier to blame? Another person or me? Of course it is easier to blame the other person. There's a joke or an anecdote that I heard once and never forgot. And it is very simple, but it goes this way. And Juliana works at a place, like at an office, just like myself. Adriana works at her office, which is the car, yeah. So she has basically nobody that works with her to blame, but we have, right? So if everything is going wrong in your office, and you're to be the one to be blamed for it because you did something wrong, and you're still laughing about it, it's because you already know who to blame for it. Because if there's no one to blame, all the blame will fall upon you. But if you know how to make it turn to blame another person, then you'll be happy about it because, oh no, it was. So what he is asking us to think about is, God is perfect. We acknowledge that God is perfect. We acknowledge that we look at God and we say that God has the perfect laws. If I am suffering, will I stop believing in God because I am suffering? No. So now, who is the one to be blamed or to take responsibility for what's going on? And that's why I was mentioning before that these chapters, they are organized the way they are, so that we are more and more getting used to the idea that we are the responsible ones for our lives, for the choices that we make, and for the things that we attract to our own lives. So if I move from one place to another and I still have the same problem, we cannot blame that city, then we blame the other work, and then we blame the other work, and then we blame the other. You are the one who are moving around, and if the problem is everywhere, it's not everywhere, it's you. So, but we tend to not to see that. It is funny that we tend not to see that. So Um, so we are suffering, and then now we got to realize that, based on his questions, that there's no escape from it. But we are still like complaining, even knowing that I am to blame to some degree. I'm still complaining. I'm still complaining about it. And then he says, "How long? For how long will my gaze, my eyes, my eyesight, will my gaze remain fixed on the horizon, limited by death?" He's asking. So, if I know all that, if I knew that I came, and that I knew that I would suffer, and I'm still suffering, even regarding and seeing that God is all powerful, and he would not want me to suffer the way I am suffering, but I'm still suffering, and I'm getting desperate because I'm suffering way too much that I think I should be. Then he asks another question. Then he asks this question that I just asked, read here. Do you know that you live forever? Do you know that this place that you're here is just temporary? Even though it is long, to our senses, it is like 80 years or whatever the amount of years. Then he asks, go and asks another question. When will your soul, and he is very precise, because he's detaching now the soul from the body, right? When will your soul finally desire to leap, to jump beyond the limits of the grave? When will I, not my body, me as a being, as an eternal being, when will I understand that I have more than just a physical body? Even if you had to suffer an entire lifetime, the entire lifetime, from the moment you were born to the very moment that you died, even if you had to suffer every single second of the life. And of course, here he's pushing the boundaries, because nobody, or almost nobody, I should say, suffers from the moment they get in to the moment he leaves. Because even a person that, say, is born with a problem, with a different deficiency, I always ask this. I always asked this question till the day that I asked a person about it. Is it worse, for example, to be born blind, or to turn blind after having seen? And if a person is born and is blind, that person is not suffering, because it's the natural thing for them. If a person is born without an arm, not saying that it's going to be easy. I'm not saying and minimizing that problem. I'm just thinking about my own perception of it. If it happened to me, it would be worse to lose it after you have it than not having it from the beginning. So what does it take for a person to suffer from the moment they are born to the moment they are dead? It needs to be a really, really, really terrible life. And there might be some people there. So he is pushing the boundaries here of suffering. And then he asks, even if you had to weep and suffer an entire lifetime, what would that be if you compared it with the eternal life that you have? The eternal glory that you're going to have by getting rid of this body that's causing all this problem. Then he says, so, with all these questions, so, seek consolation for your maladies, for your ills, for your problems, in the future that God has prepared for you. Seek consolation in, okay, if I'm doing the best that I can, if I'm really trying to make it work, if I'm really putting the effort to get rid of this, but some things I cannot get rid of, think about the future, because you are an immortal being. And if something is happening and you cannot understand, then he goes on. Look for the cause. Seek the cause of your ills, of your maladies, of your problems in the past, either in this life or in a previous life, as we discussed before. So we have the power to see things differently when we put these glasses of what Jesus came us to talk about. There is no death. That was his last message. He dies and then he reappears to show us that there's no death. And of course, he goes into this because we always tend to say that Christians like to suffer and so on. And if we read it as a praise to suffering, then we can imagine that we can understand that why people say that, oh no, Christians and Jews like to suffer. They all carry all this weight of the world in their shoulders, and they all like to suffer. They don't like to be happy. They always blaming themselves for this, for that, for this, for that. And I really don't see it that way. I see it as an understanding of the problems that we face. And then he says, in you who suffer the most, consider yourselves the blessed of this earth. Because if we are suffering the most, why are we suffering the most? That's the question that he's asking. Why are we suffering the most? And the other question is, are you really suffering the most? Isn't there anybody else that suffers more than you? So it's all a look of perspective. Once again, and then he goes back to say, when you were not born, when you were discarnate, you chose what trials and tribulations you would face while here. Because you were I'm reading, because you believed, you were strong enough to accept that trial, to bear it, to say, I'm going to face it. Then the question. You were the ones, he's saying, you were the ones who chose. So, why complain now? That's his question right after that. He says that and say, why complain now? Once again, it's hard to read when we are trying to make it for ourselves. It's easy to read when we are applying to other people, right? And we say, oh, so you chose, why are you complaining, right? But look in the mirror and say the same thing, right? It is tough. It is really tough. So we have, of course, the problems. And for us to be pure in heart, which is one of the goals of Jesus and of the gospel message, is to be purified, is to be a better person. Purified in that sense, it's to be a better person. He says that this will only get to be done, and utilizing words that are, of course, related to him. He uses the word baptism here, and he says we will be made pure by the baptism. But he will say what kind of baptism, which is not throwing yourself into the water. No, you will be made pure by the baptism of expiation and suffering. And this pain, this evil, this suffering, whatever we want to call it, when we start to think about anything that we want to do in life, anything, I want to be a better referee. I want to be a better driver. I want to be a better attorney. I want to be a better clock worker. It doesn't matter. I will suffer. I will have to go to bed late, wake up early. I will have to, have less lunch, more lunch. I have to do this. I have to do that. I'm going to waste time doing this. I cannot go out with my friends as much as I wanted. I cannot do this. I cannot. It's a sacrifice. But if we really wanted, it's a sacrifice that's worth doing because we want it. And we don't look at that thing as a suffering. We look at that as a means to get to what I need. This week, or a few weeks ago, 2 or 3 weeks ago, I asked a question to Kathleen. So I asked her, if you're on vacation and you don't need to work, still at home, have your parents, and I tell you, say, come work with me and I'll pay you for whatever. What would that be very hard for you? She said, no. I mean, I'm going to get money to get my stuff, so I will go. What if I told you, you're on vacation, you don't have Netflix, and I'm going to give you Netflix to watch your whole vacation. Spend that time watching your shows. Would that be suffering for you? Would that be hard? No, it would be good. What if I tell you that during your vacation, you're going to study? That would be hard. Why? Because it requires effort, and apparently there's no return. There's no return. And which one is actually the best one? The study one. Because money, you work and then it ends, and then you have to keep working. If you study, that thing never leaves you. But we are a people of instant gratification. We need it right now. That's why a message like this, it is very hard for us to really understand and think that suffering is something bad. Because to Kathleen and to myself, I made that question. Of course, I was talking to her and made the question to her, but I'm not going to tell that I would be happy either. It's not about being the person who I'm asking the question. Is about the question itself and how do we feel about these things. Yeah, what is really important, right? What is more important? And what St. Augustine is trying to make us understand here is that what is more important? Really, what is more important? It is the instant gratification of not suffering, and then 10 years later, because you didn't because you didn't have that suffering, then you're going to suffer even more, because now you're not going to have the time to go through those problems that you had when you were younger. So to to get to the remedy that he gives us, and I did this on purpose. I mean, I wanted to us to really understand where he wants us to get to, is to really understand that it's not suffering per suffering. It's not suffering, oh, I'm looking for suffering, I'm trying to suffer more. No, it is to understand that if something is happening that I have no control over it, I have no control, I have to understand it. And there's only one thing that can stop the suffering, is faith. Is that moment where we realize and that something happens to us, and I look at the problem, I look at the situation and tell myself, this too will pass. This too I will leave this behind. One day I will look back at this and I will say, oh, why did I worry so much about this? This faith that I am not a physical being, that I am a spiritual being that is living this moment right now within a physical body. That this faith that I am the son of God. I am the daughter of God. I am a being trying and making the effort to improve myself, going through these trials and tribulations to understand that I am better than I was before, and that my goal is to be better in the future than I am right now. Understanding that all these situations, any situation is in my life, it's put into my life so that I can look at this situation and say, hey, if I have to go through this, let me do the best that I can. And so that we will know that we know, and we will understand more and more when we answer the question, do I want the recompense? Do I want the return right now? Or do I want the return that it will be forever? Do I want the money, or do I want the knowledge? That's the question put into layman's terms. I mean, putting into what we can understand physically in our day-to-day is the same idea. Should we look for suffering? Of course not. Of course not. If I can avoid suffering in that sense of, oh, I should whip myself because of this, and I'm going to blame myself, and I'm going to, be even worse than what I was. I want a depression. I want a cancer. I want this. Why? No, I don't want any of this. But if I have it, if I receive it, let's turn that into the best that it can give me and work our way out of it. Not physically sometimes, because sometimes we can't get rid of it, but mentally. I have this friend that lost to a disease. Her father, some cousins of mine actually, or related cousin, not one of those stories in our families of a person that comes and is adopted to some degree by the family, and it's not my uncle, but it felt like an uncle, and then their kids are my cousins, and this guy, he passed away yesterday, and while I was posting tonight's lecture on Facebook, I saw that she posted something about it, and she posted a picture, a drawing actually, and a kid's drawing, and she wrote, I saw this picture of this drawing that my son drew, her son drew, and he looked at it, and there were 2 or 3 people, and there was like a figure on the right side, And she was asking, "What is this? What is this? What is this?" And then she asked, "What is this here?" And then he answers, "This is Grandpa um, on the bed, being taken care by God." And we will notice this. We will have that feeling one day. The kid is showing that in his drawing. The kid was thinking about his dad, and he probably is learning with her husband, and wherever they are taking him, that there's still life. There's life after death. That we live on. That we continue. And once we realize that within ourselves, we really have that, not the knowledge, but the real feeling. That's that faith that Saint Augustine is talking about. That will, as Jesus taught us, and as he mentions here, faith can move mountains. And if it can move mountains, it can bring us up. It can make us continue. It can make us go on. So hopefully I was able to make the message from Saint Augustine come to life. This is a message that I have read before, but I never actually really felt it like I felt it today. It is interesting how these things go, and so I highly recommend. This is not a message to be read lightly. I mean, to be read and then just skim through it. No, it's a message to be really, felt, like as if we are eating something that we like. Just to feel the words, feel the connections that he is making, and it is for ourselves. It's nutrition to our own soul. So it's Evil and Its Remedy, message number 19, chapter 5, from the Gospel according to Spiritism, Evil and Its Remedy by Saint Augustine. So thank you for the patience. Thank you for being here. Thank you guys that may be watching online for watching. And if you later on want to talk about it, we can talk a little bit more about the message. But this is a wonderful message. Are we going to have the passes? Are you going to take passes? Okay, so after the passes, I'll just come and do the final prayer. So thank you.